recording today. Okay, go.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time you're tuning in the program called What's Going On FlintTalkRadio.com. I'm George Moss, the host of the program, and we're glad to have you here this afternoon. Since this is the first Monday of the month, we don't have in the studio this afternoon Miss Catherine Williams, who is here every second and fourth Mondays, and she will be here next week, along with our own program that starts at 3:30. Satoro's Black History Corner, and we hope you'll be tuned in to those programs and all programs here at FlintTalkRadio.com. Very glad to have you with us this afternoon. I think we have a lot to talk about. Probably about 3 or 4 subjects we want to get into this afternoon. The first of which is the breaking story that's breaking around the issue of Benghazi, which is not going to go away, by the way, and those who were wishing it into non-existence, we're getting a wake-up call to those persons as of Wednesday of this week. My understanding is that we're going to have hearings refurbished in terms of bringing persons before the congressional committees, the relevant committees, to investigate, that is investigating what occurred on September 11th in 2012. And I think a lot of things are becoming clear, one of which is that this was a cover-up that has occurred in the present administration. I don't think there's any question about that. As to the particulars, I think that there are a couple of persons that are going to be primary witnesses in terms of what really occurred on September 11th of 2012. And one name that's coming forward is this person that was the head of the charge d'affaires in the aftermath of Benghazi, in which 4 Americans were in fact killed in what looks like an incident that could have been prevented. We had coming to the surface as the head of the charge d'affaires in the aftermath of that heinous crime, a person by the name of Gary Hicks. And I have to say this about Gary Hicks from what I've been reading, and that is that Gary Hicks is a very brave person, very courageous, and one of the ones that's being taunted as a whistleblower who was quoted in the news last weekend as saying that his jaw dropped on the floor once he heard the testimony of people like Susan Rice, who was the UN ambassador going before the public, was on 5 different television programs the Sunday after the Benghazi affair had run its course, and was saying that it was not a planned attack, but this was nothing other than a demonstration outside of the consul in Benghazi in Libya, and it just got out of control and it turned into this fiasco that had occurred. The demonstration, it was saying, was over a video that had been made. And running with this story on 5 different programs, we now are getting information that I think indicates fairly conclusively that this story, these talking points run by Susan Rice and others in the administration, Jay Carney, the president's spokesperson to the news, was fabricated, with the talking points being changed from what they were originally in terms of what really had occurred, which was, this looks like an Al-Qaeda preemptive strike. I shouldn't even say preemptive, because there was no threat that was being posed by the embassy in Benghazi. This was a provocative strike on the part of Al-Qaeda that was determined to make a statement on 9/11. I don't know why we didn't anticipate this, because it was an anniversary of what occurred on September the 1st, 2001, and this being the 10th anniversary, the 11th anniversary of that event. I don't know why there was not some anticipation of that possibly being the case, particularly in an area that is very volatile at this point, in the overthrow of the Gaddafi regime that had occurred earlier at the behest and with some support, some military support by the United States. But it's really going to be very interesting to find out in more detail who are the persons that were engaged in this cover-up, and it has tremendous implications not only for the present, but also it has tremendous implications for 2016. And we'll talk about that as well in terms of what those implications are in the future. But right now, we're talking about an incident that is as explosive as Watergate. And it hasn't played out that way up to this point because the media has not been doing its job. But if the media does its job from this point forward, and we see some indications that they're now being called out to do the job because there's too much evidence out there right now that indicates something is going on here that's not being investigated, and so they're kind of being prodded into doing an investigation, because how do you avoid the issue now that it's, the information is coming out piecemeal with those persons that are now being called whistleblowers, but really just people that want to come out and set the record straight, because we have 4 dead Americans here, and someone has to be held to account as to why that occurred. And we don't have anyone coming forth telling us what really happened. We don't even know who was in the situation room, or should say the war room at the White House, in terms of who was sitting there watching this incident unfold in real time. We're told that there were people watching the event as it played out, that there was a drone overhead in Benghazi, that as this was taking place, there was a live feed into the White House, so that we had real-time observation of what was taking place as it was in fact taking its course. I'm talking about an event that went on over the course of what, 6 hours, 7 hours? Enough time for the military units that were in the area to have responded in that time period if the command had been given to do so. And now we're hearing that there was a command for those units to stand down and not engage in the situation. We need to find out who gave that command and who those persons were that were in that room watching this in real time as an ambassador plus 3 others lost their lives. We need answers here. And this matter could be very explosive, and it could lead to, and it should, if the evidence is leading where it seems to be headed, if it's really heading up to the Secretary of State, the former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and reaches into the White House even above her pay grade, up to and through the former ambassador to the United Nations, Susan Rice, and through her to the President of the United States, that this could be a ticking time bomb on this administration, although I'm not saying that there is a courage in the nation's capital to see this to the ultimate end, in terms of if there are these persons who in fact knowingly came before the American people with a false story and created this narrative in order to gain political advantage, then the ultimate should be then to bring in charges under Article 2, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution. I don't see how you get around that. And if we could bring charges or threaten charges against Richard Nixon in 1974 as a result of what occurred in 1972 at the Watergate Hotel, in which the Watergate headquarters, the Democratic headquarters that was housed in the Watergate Hotel, if that could bring down President Nixon, in which no lives were lost, it's hard to imagine that this event, in which 4 Americans lost their lives, could result in less of a situation that occurred in 75, when the actual standing down occurred on the part of the Nixon administration in August of that year. So we're looking at a real situation here, and we have got to get some answers. I think we're going to get those answers starting Wednesday, because the whistleblowers, quote unquote, quote, are now being called forward. And from all intimations and from all of the preliminary reports, it looks like there are people who want to come forward and want the protective cover of not having any kind of retaliation against their jobs and things of that sort in their careers, because they want to come forward and tell what they know about this egregious condition that prevails as a result of what occurred in Benghazi. I think what is clear, even before we get to Wednesday, when we begin to have the hearings, I hope they'll be as public as they were in Watergate, because what we did with the Sam Ervin Committee, if you remember back in that time period when they began to investigate Watergate, we had daily reports. We had daily hearings. We were sitting there watching it as if we were watching a soap opera. And every day they had us, which I think they should have done, they had us invited into opening up and being transparent about what they were investigating. And there was no doubt about the fact that over the 2-year period of time in which this investigation ran its course, that somebody had to answer for this. And it reached into, at some point, the White House, and the ultimate person to answer for it, the buck stopped at where it should stop, at the president's desk. That's the way it should have been. And although Nixon preempted impeachment by stepping down from his position, there was no doubt about the fact that given what was occurring in those hearings, that there was going to be some call for him to stand down or face impeachment charges. I want to go into that just for a minute as well and tell you that what occurred there was that some of his own party members went to the White House and told the president that there was a real problem developing around his administration, and the longevity of which they could not ensure they would in fact stand up if it came before the Senate upon impeachment hearings, because the impeachment itself takes place in the House by a majority vote, and if they're all present, then we're talking about 218 votes to bring about impeachment, 218 votes or more, and then it goes to the Senate for trial, where it takes 2/3 of the senators to vote to convict based upon the articles of impeachment. And senators, Republican senators went to the White House and told the president, told President Nixon, that, Mr. President, if this came to a vote, your presidency would be in jeopardy. And when the president asked these members, I don't have the names right in front of me about the ones that went there, I think it was five senators that went to the White House, and when the president asked them, who were formerly some of his staunchest supporters, how would you vote? And when they told him, Mr. President, if it came before the Senate, what we know right now, we would have to vote for conviction. And at that point, the president understood that the die had been cast, and that he had no other choice but to, in fact, vacate the office.
Richie, you're talking about a different time, though, because back then the Republicans especially had more of a moral center than the Democrats, in my opinion, ever have. But anyway, yeah, see, he was embarrassable. He could be embarrassed. Nixon could be. Clinton couldn't be embarrassed. This guy can't be embarrassed. Obama, he's the most arrogant man I've ever seen hold the office.
Well,
arrogant man.
You're making a good point about the difference in the politics. I do want to shade it just a little bit differently than you did, John, and that is to say that what we had here was a liberal media that was, in fact, that had the goods on a conservative, a Republican president whom the media despised. And we can go back as early as 1960 to see that in terms of the campaign that Nixon ran against John F. Kennedy in that year. And then after he was defeated in 1960, then he ran for the governor in 1962 in California, and he lost that also. The media was on his case in that episode as well. And he said in his, what he thought at that point was his swan song, his farewell speech after losing in California, said that you won't have Richard Nixon to kick around again. We didn't, of course, have any way of saying that he would rise again politically in 1968. The political circumstance would change, and his candidacy was no longer out on the boondocks, so to speak, but he's really now a viable candidate in 1968. Given the fact that we'd had the Vietnam War and the president resigning because of Vietnam, and then the floodgates being open to another possible running for the White House. Plus we had riots in the street, and the people were tired of the lack of security they felt inside the country, as we didn't have domestic tranquility because of so many things that were going on, particularly at in Chicago, where they had the Democratic Convention that year, and it was just confusion and chaos. So I think people looked at that candidacy a different way, and put a conservative in the White House. But the press was not happy with the outcome, and when you give the liberal media a loaded gun and then hand it to them and tell them to shoot you with it, practically speaking, then that's what's going to happen. So what you have in Watergate was that here was a situation that the media was in fact willing to run with, and given the fact that there was some issue here of the president's involvement in it, I mean, all the president's men, Wood and Bernstein, their book by that title, and then the film that came out, and the fact that there was some reason to believe it went all the way up to the White House. There was no reason not to believe that. And the media putting the spotlight on it. I don't know what senators under those circumstances or any members of the House that could have come out and surrounded the president with the wagons and said, Mr. President, we're going to insulate you from this, because the liberal media would have got on their case and their candidacies would be in trouble. That's not the case right now. And I think that what I would add to what John said is that you have a reversal right now. The liberal media is not going to run the story the way they did with Watergate. So that becomes one part of it. And then because the media is not going to inflame the public, which is what it was doing in 1973 and thereafter until the president resigned, they're not going to induce the public to get involved in it to the point where they're going to be calling for anybody to scalp, as they did with Richard Nixon, so that there's a different politics that plays out, and the stakes are different. But in terms of courage, I don't know politicians I don't think you use the word courage with politicians in the same sentence with the politician's name, because who is courageous in politics? In order to be courageous, you have to put the country first, and I don't see it. I try to be fair in terms of politicians, but I just don't see where they put anything first before they put their own political careers. In fact, I think that if that is the case, then politicians, by the very way they carry their job out, is committing treason. Because if you're not there as a representative of the government, and you're not representing the government first, but your own political career, I mean, what is that? I mean, is that, you wouldn't call it, I mean, none dare call it treason. But what is it? When the country's destiny is put on the back burner, and you put your own political career on the front burner, and you in fact make decisions that hurt the country, although it does not put your political career in jeopardy. Your political career more important than taking care of the country's business. I don't know how you would define it other than it being treasonous, behavior. Because I think, in time that you shred the Constitution, which is what has occurred in this country with almost all the politicians. I don't know of anyone up there, given the fact that Ron Paul has now vacated the premises, and Coburn is leaving in 2014, not running again. And there are a few others. There's not many, but there's a few others that try to uphold the standards. But the numbers are not significant enough to turn the tide in Washington. And I have no, I'm about as cynical as Glenn Beck was last week when I listened to his program, and he was saying that he thought that it's pretty much over in terms of where we are right now. That does not mean we're going to stop throwing punches out here, but it does mean that we've gone so far down this road that it's hard to see how you take a U-turn and come back toward the framers and come back toward the founding fathers who set into motion certain things and how the government should in fact operate. There have been so many pillars that have been taken from underneath what was in fact intended that you wonder how it's Humpty Dumpty, right? I mean, how you put the Humpty Dumpty back together again? We fell off the wall, and when we fell away from a lot of our constitutional restraints and refused to abide by them, where none of the institutions in Washington are working, I don't know how it's just like, how do you put that together again, given the present state of affairs and the particular political circumstances that we're now dealing with? I mean, how do you do that? And I have some ways of, I have some ideas of how we're going to have to do it, but not under the present condition. Here's the point that was made on one of the radio shows on my way to the studio a few minutes ago, and I think this has a lot of credence. One of the radio hosts said that it's not the division of the country is not that's driving the country down is not between the races, black and white, or whatever race you want to throw into the mix. It's not even between rich and poor, whichever groups you talk about in terms of those that are rich and those who are poor, however you quantify the terms of that. It's not between classes, and it's not even the issue between those who are born here and those who are not born here. The issue, the divisional issue in this country is between Washington and the rest of the country. And when he said that, I had to nod my head, because the fact of the matter is that we've been on this, going toward this cliff ever since 1913 with the passage of the 17th Amendment. And we don't even know, we don't even realize in this country how fundamental that shaking of the federal system was by the inclusion in the Constitution, the 17th Amendment, which repeal Article 1, Section 3 of parts of Article 1, Section 3, I think it's Clause 6 of the Constitution, which tells us how you elect the senators in this country, which was in fact a different way in which we elect the members of the House of Representatives. I mean, let's not forget who we're dealing with these framers. These framers were sitting there in that room, and they were stymied there for a minute in terms of what they needed to do now that they were trying to bring into existence a new, well, what Lincoln said, right, in terms of Gettysburg Address, bring forth a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. I mean, how do you do that? And they had to sit in that room trying to figure this thing out. And there is a report that I just got through reading in one of the books. I can't think which one it is. I'm reading so many different books at the same time. I'm kind of telling you I'm losing my discipline in reading. I'm reading, trying to read everything at the same time. So many different things you have to read. But they came together and said, well, we've come this far, and we were using prayer to get through the hardships. Are we now supposed to forget about the power of prayer and act as if it no longer has any power to help us get through another minefield? And so they prayed. They're in that room praying for understanding. And I'm not saying some voice came down and a UFO or something. These programs on these networks. Quite. I mean, it's amazing some of the things that they have on the air right now. But I'm not talking about somebody came down in a ship, as some people are claiming, and talked in their ear, and all of a sudden these light bulbs went off, and they were writing things down, and all these mythical things that go on. No, what they did is they put their best minds on the table, and they didn't give in to the fact that they're tired, and they really were defeated. But what they did was put the perseverance forward and continue to think about it. Have you ever had this happen in your own personal life where you thought that the end result was already written and you began to think about it more deeply, and something that was not open to you before is now open to you, and now you have another outlook that you didn't have before, that you would not have gained if you in fact stopped? Well, it didn't stop. And I have personal testimonies of that, because I could tell you that I had many days where I thought that in my own household there was no food in there. And I say, Mom, what are you having for dinner? She would say, let me think about it. Let me study up on it. And she would study up on it. We would claim there's no food in there, and before we know, she's in there frying something. And we were saying, how did that happen? But my mother studied up on it, and she found a way to do something that we didn't think was possible. What she did was boil some potatoes and then mash them, put some flour on it, and fry them. We thought we eat meat. That would never have happened if she had not continued to think about it. And if you do that, you come up with some answers that you didn't have in the beginning of the process. You have to figure it out. And they sat in that room and figured it out. And when they came up with these ideas, they came up with an idea that no one else had come up with in terms of how to chain power down. And when I read that Constitution, I have to tell you something. I am really amazed at how many ways, I mean creative ways, how many creative pathways that they created to chain power down, because they understood power. they have been victims of it in terms of being arrayed against them, in terms of the Parliament, King George III, his octoroon consort, wife, mistress, whatever you want to call her, Charlotte Sophia. These persons had used power in a tyrannical way, and they were going to chain power down. It was the last thing that they did, and the way that they did it, not only on the, we all know how they did it on the federal level, but they intended to chain power down on the horizontal level as well, meaning, I should say on the vertical level as well, which means that from the federal government to the state governments, they're going to chain power down. And the way they're going to chain it down is have the states send their representatives to Washington and look over these politicians' shoulders and hold them accountable to what the states wanted them to do, because the states were the creators of the federal government. And that's what they did, and that worked out that way until 1913, but they began to chisel away at that. You know, politicians are going to be politicians in whatever era. And it's interesting to go back and read about the process through which they finally got to 1913, where they repealed Article 1, Section 3, I think Clause 6, and put in place the 17th Amendment. But it's really interesting to see how quickly they began to chisel away at the state sending the representative to Washington. They began to chisel away at that as early as 1826, which is 50 years. Let me get this straight. 1787, 97, 2007, 2017. Okay, that's 40 years. 40 years, more like 39 years, but 40 years after they had drawn the Constitution up. All of a sudden, I think the person's name was one of the representatives, the senator's name, it was one of the senators named Story. Began to chisel away at that process. And over a period of time, what occurred was that every so often the issue we brought up of electing the senator the same way you elect the way you elect the members of the House. And finally, in 1913, with 31 states threatening that if the Congress did not in fact change the way in which it did not in fact send a proposal to the states in terms of how we elect the senators, then 31 states decided a petition saying that they were going to call a constitutional convention, which frightened, of course, the members of the Congress, the idea of calling a convention that they don't control, and you get there and you start changing everything, maybe decide to throw them out of power. They couldn't have that, so they rushed in to bring forth the proposal by 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate, and sent it to the states, and then 3/4 of the states ratified it, and now we got the 17th Amendment on the books, to which we now have the popular election of the senators. It makes no sense, particularly when you understand why it was. I want you to look at this very carefully, because the framers were people that had tremendous insight. I don't think we can compare any persons coming after them that had the insights they had into how you govern and how you, in fact, restrain power. I mean, these people were geniuses. And I endorse what Ayn Rand says in the book called The New Intellectuals, where she says that the framers, the founders, were the first and so far the last intellectuals this country has produced. Now, there are some intellectuals that you have here, like Mises and Ayn Rand, but they weren't produced here. They were produced elsewhere and came here as immigrants. And they came here to offer something, didn't come here to get on welfare, which is our immigration policy right now on these people in Washington. So the 17th Amendment makes no sense, particularly given that it's not even accompanied by, therefore, restricting the senators 2 years like you do the members of the House. I mean, if you're gonna change the way we elect senators from the House to the Senate, from the House in which we have the popular election, and change it from the way we elect senators, which was the state sending the representatives there for 6-year terms, then if you're going to have the senators popularly elected as you do the members of the House, it makes no sense to maintain the 6-year term of senators. Nobody's ever said that before, to my knowledge, on the air. It's being said here. I said it before on the air here at FlintTalkRadio.com. No one else has said that, but it makes absolutely no sense. Nobody has raised that issue. But if you're going to have the popular election of the senators, it makes no sense to make the term 6 years. I mean, let's go back and let's go back for a minute, because I'm going to finish this and go to 2 other topics before we get off the air today. But let's go back and look at the framers again, because I don't think we have enough appreciation of who these persons were, who these intellectuals were, that had a tremendous understanding of what they were doing in that convention. And when they lost the understanding, they simply asked for new insights and prayed over it. I don't know, nobody want to hear that today, that they actually got into prayer, not when you're telling me that if you pray in the armed services, if you so much to mention your religion in the armed services, they now want to court-martial you and put you in a dishonorable discharge after putting you in jail for 4 years for mentioning that you're a Christian. They're not talking about that. So I know people may not want to hear that they were involved in prayerful means to bring forth new insights. And, you know, when you close your eyes by way to pray, what you really are doing is calling from the back of your mind certain things that are back there existing in darkness. And when you close your eyes and you are in darkness where thought is in fact created, you might know where thought is in fact created. Thought is created in darkness. And it's only when the idea is formed that it comes into the light. But you think in darkness. That's why you close your eyes on those tests that you weren't passing. At the university, they're in the back of the room, closing their eyes, trying to think about what was it that I read on that page. And I mean, I do that a lot. I used to do that a lot when I was in undergrad school, because if I read it, I could recall it. But I have to close my eyes in order to think about, okay, what's that? What page was that on? I can tell you what page it was on. And I'd go up and open my eyes up and write it down on the test. I think those teachers thought I was back there sleeping. But I'd have my eyes closed, trying to conjure up the information that I knew was back there, existing in a dark space. I had to bring it up into the open and then call it and put it on that paper. And so that's what they did. They simply got into prayer. And there are some ideas that you have in your mind you're not even aware that you have. You're unconscious of those ideas. And that's the revelation also. And you can say somebody's talking to you also in the back of your cerebellum and your medulla or whatever those names are. I'm not as good at that as Ben Carson. But wherever those thoughts are, wherever they exist in that revelatory world, then that's what you're calling up. And that's what they did. And they came up with, we chain it down horizontally. We're going to have the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. You're going to have all that divided. We're going to have this branch check on that branch, these two check on that one check on these other two, and we're going to have a counterbalancing kind of operation in place where each branch of government checks another branch. That's what they had in mind. Now, the federal government is created by the states. So how are the states going to get their voices heard way over there in Washington? Well, the idea was that we're going to send the senators up there. And we're going to have them to let the federal government know that your power is limited by the fact that the states are your creator, and you must in fact restrain yourself based upon that evidentiary fact. That is, so we can prove that to be the case. Because a strong federal government did not exist before the state gave it more power and created more sovereignty on that level. But it was in fact jealous of that power they had given. They wanted to watch over that power they had given would not be in fact abused, or in fact you take more power than what was in fact given to the federal government. Now, I mean, it's itemized, as a matter of fact. If we ever go back and look at the Constitution and read it, and stop letting people tell us, like Roberts, what's in there, and these people in the Supreme Court, as if they are omniscient and they know better than what we know. We read it also, and that's why I'm getting to the point now where they're not going to like me too much when I say this right here, but I'm getting to the point right now where we're going to start defying some of these rulings made by the Supreme Court, because if it's not constitutional. And I read it just as well as they do. I don't know what makes us believe that people put a robe on, all of a sudden they got some kind of divine understanding. If you tell me that you can make us buy something and as long as you call it a tax, you can force us to create commerce, and then you tax it as a commercial entity that you made us get involved in. that is in fact constitutional. It's certainly not constitutional under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, the Commerce Clause. So they made it constitutional under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, which is the power of the tax clause. And we're supposed to follow this and, go along with that. And so, we can't, we're a little bit off here. And it's not only off in terms of what we're seeing right now, but what we've done in the past has shaped the federal system. And that election of the senators by the popular election while leaving in place the 6-year term, that makes no sense. I'm just sorry. Nobody else has said that. But the reason why that makes no sense is that if you're going to change the terms of the accountability of the senators, then at least have them come. Let me use my other finger for this one. Let them at least come before the voters with the same regularity as the members of the House do, so that we can then hold them accountable. Well, we don't have 6 years to have those guys doing what they want to do, and then we forget about it. And by the time they come around again for re-election, their seats are pretty safe. When's the last time we threw some of those guys out of there? I heard some of them leaving voluntarily. I wish it wasn't the senator from Oklahoma, Tom Coburn. He's one of the few up there that has any respect for the Constitution. I'm not even sure if that's true of Rand Paul, and I'm really asking at Marco Rubio, who I don't know where he's coming from anymore, and I hope he's give me a break. These people come up there and act like they're going to do some different things, and we are standing on the Constitution. They get up there and start talking out of the side of their mouths, too, and it's just really disheartening. But there are some that are leaving voluntarily. Some of which I wish it would not people like Coburn, but some of them need to step down, stand down, and we need to change some things up there too in terms of if we're not going to restore. We're not going to restore the way we elect senators. I think we should do that. That should be primary on our list. I'm certainly be calling for it when we get this Constitutional Convention in place, which is going to happen, by the way. It's just a matter of time, but I haven't got enough person yet to be convinced that that's the only route. That's the only thing that's going to save us. We can't. Nothing else is going to work. And so I'm just telling you right now that what I'm calling for, I'm just letting you know that's if that doesn't happen, then kiss this country goodbye, because nothing else is going to work. You cannot send in that cesspool this person and that person and go in there in that environment, and they're going to come out uncorrupted in that environment. Washington is too broken for that to happen. I'm just telling you that. I have to be honest with you, and I can't come up here, I can't come before you and tell you things that I know are patently absurd. And that's absurd to the power of 10. That's not going to happen. You can send the Tea Party up there all you want to. You sent 87 of them up there in 2010. And people like Ted Cruz, those persons are, very, astute and fundamentally sound politicians. They have some love and feel some restraint upon power based upon that which is written in the Constitution. But their number is not large, and their impact is not great. And we're going to send 87 more up there. And you're going to find them saying what Rand Paul said, and that is, here's Rand Paul's statement, and which really was eye-opening. He said that he would support term limits for another reason, not just he wasn't talking about the corrupting. He wasn't talking about the fact that we need to send them home and put new faces up there just because you need new blood. He's talking about the fact that you go into Washington with the idea you're going to change X, Y, and Z, and there's so much entrenched that's unmovable, there's so many immovable parts that you get burned out just fighting against the structure that's in place. And he said that the burnout is so great that you can't continue to fight against that wall without you know, getting in some way getting disoriented, you know, discombobulated, I guess you have to say, in the face of that power that is monolithically standing there in opposition to what you're trying to do. Because some of them went there with the idea was going to change Washington and got transformed in the process by Washington. And that's not going to, and I'm just telling you that the structure, just like this guy said in the air, is the division really is Washington against the rest of us. And that's just the way it is. I mean, it's 50 states without a voice against that monolithic structure that's in Washington, D.C. And it's on all fronts, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. That's just stacked against, with them determining what the going rate is going to be in this country. That's why I was glad. South Carolina, you can say what you want to about South Carolina. And I know everybody's going to be telling me about they were the first one to leave out the Union in 1860. In 1860, after the election was over and Abraham Lincoln had become the president, having received 303 electoral votes in that particular election. And I know people are going to say, well, they left the Union and bolted out of the Union because Lincoln was going to free the slaves, as if he was going to do that. Give me a break. There were tariff issues involved, and Lincoln's affiliation with on the side of the tariff interest, which is the northeastern interest, caused South Carolina to do what it threatened to do as early as the 1820s. They had talked about bolting in 1828, and it had nothing to do with slavery, and Lincoln was not going to free the slaves when he got in there. And if anybody wants to challenge that notion, I'm ready to bring forth absolute evidence there, because there's no evidence on the other side of it. Don't even get me started on that, because I won't be able to get to these other two topics. But just trust me on that one until we bring forth the proof in future programs here on FlintTalkRadio.com. What I'm saying here, though, is that Washington's brokenness, if we're not going to fix it through going back to what the framers put in place, at least let us then continue the process, complete the process that was started when you had the popular election of the senators. Because it makes, I have to tell you, it makes no sense for you to have 6-year terms for senators when you elect them the same way you elect members of the House. Somebody make me understand that, because it doesn't make any sense. Not to me. And nobody's brought that up. I'm bringing it up. And as I do a lot of things I bring up for the first time, and people, I got, like, for example, I'm on Facebook. I tell you every week, I'm on Facebook a lot. And on Facebook, there's this article today where one of my Facebook confidants, someone that I have a lot of respect for on Facebook. It's not a lot, because a lot of y'all out there writing all this yin and yang on my wall. I don't know why you think you're going to come into on my wall and change my mind with the gibberish that you're writing. Some of you writing that nonsense and thinking that it's going to impact, you're going to shout me down. I mean, I find that to be funny. I mean, that's ludicrous. But today, they have this one post, and it's about the framers. They weren't talking about the framers so much. They were talking about, because this is the pre-framers period, talking about the ones that came to the country in 1607. In May 1607, they had the arrival of 104 settlers that came here. This would have been 13 years before the Mayflower, and they came here, and now they're looking at this archaeological evidence that shows that that colony had turned into a colony of cannibals. And so, you know what that did? Oh boy, we can go back and hit them now. You mean to tell me that there were cannibals in the early settlers? One guy wrote about, and they want to call the Indian savages. Oh yeah, they had a field day on that one. So I wrote and said that the skeletal remains can point out certainly the practice that occurred, but it cannot tell us why the practice occurred. And I was quoting, I'll tell you what I was quoting. I was quoting this book right here, and nobody wants to hear this because it's the title of the book. It has capitalism in it. It's not advocating socialism in the title. It's called How Capitalism Saved America. Excuse me. And in chapter 3, they have this chapter titled How Capitalism Saved the Pilgrims. Now nobody want to hear that. Capitalism saving something? You mean to tell me we're not talking about crony capitalism here? And I was using, I had read this book before and I knew it was in there, so I was just kind of going from memory of what it said, but I can quote it since I have the book right here, and I can quote what it says by reading it. And it says that the American settlers originally adopted communal ownership of land and property. It was communally owned. Nobody had private property rights. And he says that this was a problem endured in later centuries by virtually every community country that adopted, and he uses these words here, collectivized agriculture. And he says that this is the reason why in that environment, collectivized agriculture, meaning that you do not own what you produce, which disincentivizes effort, and so therefore there's no granary in the warehouse during the winter, and that's what's causing the starvation, and that's what led to any of the cannibalistic practices that occurred, because they were in fact practicing socialism. That's what it really amounts to, and we know that to be the case because when the same thing happened with the Pilgrims who arrived in 1620, the governor of the state, or I should say the colony of Virginia, fixed the problem by creating private ownership of land and private ownership of that which you produce. Now everyone got to produce their food source, or they starve because of the lack of their own effort. So once they put it in the hands of the private market, so to speak, the private sector, then we saw the starvation end. So yeah, you're right about what you wrote on your wall, but the skeletal remains did not tell you why what is called the starving times occurred. And the starving times occurred because at this point we had not yet understood the tenets of capitalism. We understand it now, and we try to deny that which we know. But that is the only thing that saved the Pilgrims later on.
You know, I was just thinking about this the other day. I was walking around about why were the West, we grew up, wealthier than the rest of the world. And it was because we did value the individual. And ironically, the individual going for their own, using their own efforts to better their own existence, even the most greediest individual eventually will have to spend money on something to get, with maybe the hopes of getting something greater down the road. Mm-hmm. So they release some of the cash into the general population. And I hate to tell these people, these naysayers, but trickle down does work. That's the only way it ever works.
It's the only way it ever works, yeah. John. They want to act as if the wealthy are so selfish that they are not willing to do that which in fact serves other persons. To be honest with you, you can't get wealthy unless you're using a gun, and certainly no business person have the power to go and use guns against people, make you buy their product. It's out of the selfishness of the wealthy class that gets them to do that which trickles down to others, because only by serving others can you in fact become wealthy in the first place. This is a point well made. There's a pamphlet I'm reading right now by this man who was an absolute genius. I think he died in 1973, if I'm not mistaken. This master economist. When I say master economist, you automatically know I'm not talking about Paul Krugman, and I'm not talking about John Maynard Keynes. I don't know why we keep talking about Keynesian economics as if this was something that ever worked. I'm talking about Ludwig von Mises. And he has a very good, interesting pamphlet which contains about 6 of his lectures. I like to read his lectures more than reading his writings, because in his lectures he's very concise and erudite in what he's saying, and then a lot of the jargon is in his writing. Now, although when he's writing, I read the book called Socialism by him, and it's a big book, and you have to be very focused on reading it, because a lot of these concepts are very, very complex. But in his lectures, this book called He's dealing with the he calls it the anti-capitalist mentality, which contains 6 of his lectures in that little pamphlet of about 66 pages. And he talks about this notion that the capitalist class, those that are there, are in a market that is unforgiving. For example, he says that if you, for example, satisfied the needs of your customers yesterday, but you stop satisfying their needs the next day, they stop participating with you. They don't have no memory of the fact that you did well by them the day before. They are unforgiving. And it's the fact that you cannot force them to materially invest with what you're producing, that you must in fact continue to do what Mises says, that is the demand of the consumer. We demand to have our needs and our desires satisfied. And that's what the businessman must do. And in doing that, in a selfish mode to get your money, he must in fact, in his own selfishness, satisfy the requirements of those who he wants to buy his products. That's the selfishness playing out in the marketplace. And I was trying to argue this on radio the other day. It didn't get aired because somehow the tape got. It was a very good debate, I thought, and it didn't come on the air last week. We thought because the tape was erased by mistake in the studio. That's not here at FlintTalkRadio.com, by the way. We don't erase tapes by mistake here. We're too professional. That's my story I'm going to stick to until I leave the studio. but no, we don't do that here because we don't have as many as employers that where you have the left hand and right hand not always knowing what the left hand is doing, and right hand doesn't know what the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing. So that doesn't. The chance of it happening here is remote, more remote than it was there. But what I was trying to argue was that there has never been a coercive monopoly in the history of the United States. I don't care what the politicians say about it. We've never had a coercive monopoly in this country. And the reason for that is because businesses cannot coerce you to do business with them. And because they...
Except for insurance companies, and they get government to pass laws requiring you to have
insurance. See, now that's the other thing. So that's not capitalism there. That's another name that's used here in this book called How Capitalism Saved America. We want to act like that's capitalism. That's mercantilism. It's mercantilism, by the way. I finally got a membership to this one club. We have to have a membership card to go in there, and they ask you at the door. You show me your card, and you go in there, and you pay just as much you're paying there as you pay at the smaller stores. but anyway, there's some things there that you can't buy that you can't buy anywhere else, and you buy it in bulk. So you probably know the store I'm talking about. But when they come into a city, that particular chain comes to a city, there are businesses that meet with politicians. And they try to block them from coming in because they know that when this particular group comes in with that large chain store selling at those prices, they know that they cannot compete. So they go to the politician, as they on which they do constantly, and then invite him in through situating themselves with his campaign to use him, hire him to keep the other guy out. And so that they can maintain their business without competing against this guy here who's a better competitor than they are. That's not capitalism, that's mercantilism. And that's a distinction made in De Lorenzo's book called How Capitalism Saved America. They like to put capitalism on the term because they want to make it look like that's capitalism that's in fact running out of control, running amok. They call it crony capitalism. I argued last week.
Mercantilism's got a new name. It's called corporatism.
Yeah, corporatism.
Yeah, corporatism. See, it's the same thing.
It's the same thing. It's the politicians getting involved in the marketplace. And you know something? You can't fix that until we get the politicians to get out of the marketplace. It does not mean that you do not have the business community follow the same laws that as private citizens would follow. You can't violate the laws. You can't poison the food and things like that. Certainly, you can't. You got to have restrictions upon those kinds of things.
Other thing is like in the meat industry and other packing industry and stuff like that. Those people who actually sought out regulation in the first place were other producers of the same products. They're the ones because they were trying to shut out. They knew that they could meet the demand for regulation, but they thought maybe they could cut out their competitors who maybe couldn't make the cut. So it was kind of it was kind of half, attempt to try and appeal to the public saying, we care about your safety.
Exactly.
But they're also trying to shut out their competitors.
Well, you read Upton Sinclair's book then, right? So because you're quoting almost everything that, you're not quoting it, but you're certainly alluding to what his findings were in that book called The Jungle. The idea that the FDA was set up in 1905. The Food and Drug Administration set up in 1905. And of course, the politicians would have us believe that it was set up because these people are so concerned about the American people and so on and so forth. Really, if you want to go back to Mises and look at his thesis about these anti-capitalist minds that you have, it's really none of these politicians that want to be everything that the business people are and that they can never be, and that is the producers of something other than this noise that they're making. And that the FDA was set up during the progressive time period. This is set up during the Theodore Roosevelt administration, and set up during the time period when he's running in his own term, having succeeded William McKinley. And now we have this progressive in there, this Republican progressive, because Republicans are just progressive as the Democrats are in many ways. And they set this up in order to set over those who they call robber barons. They never have yet told me, and this is what, how many years later, 108 years later, they haven't told us yet who they were robbing. For some reason, that remains a mystery. Let me before we get out of here, I wanted to talk a little bit about this article that came out last weekend. Sports Illustrated, you probably are aware that they got on the front cover Jason Collins, the one that came out and told us about he has been hiding his sexuality since for the last 12 years in the National Basketball Association. I don't know who cared one way or the other. I don't see anybody out there talking about we ought to get him and throw him out of basketball because of that. Most of the persons were hugging on him because they want to let him know that they were not bigots and things of that sort. I don't know what the bigotry. This guy was expecting some kind of outrage over. I don't know where he thought the bigotry would be in the first place. But on the front cover, I got to read a couple of things here before we go off the air. The headline is, first of all, a picture of Jason Collins, and next to it, this big headline, "The Gay Athlete." And it quotes him saying, "I didn't set out to be the first openly gay athlete in a major American team sport. But since I am, I'm happy to start the conversation." And I asked a question in an article I wrote on this. Start the conversation about what? What is there to discuss about that? He likes men. Talk to us about what bedroom he enjoys those pleasures in. I mean, what are we supposed to discuss about that? If I came on the air and told you about something in my private life, what am I supposed to? What would I want to discuss that for? To get you to do what? And to hear what you have to say about it, as if that would be relevant. But anyway, I mean, everybody got the right to their own choice. I can disagree with the choice, but I don't think it has anything to do with trying to stop it. If it's two adults that are consented to be involved in an arrangement, I don't see who outside those adults whose right it is to say otherwise. Now, you might have all kinds of understandings of what's called for in mandates that you tenets that you appeal to. You can have all kinds of moral objections or even political objections. But in terms of you being able to integrate that into that relationship, I don't know how you can do that or feel you have the right to do that. But here's what I thought I thought was a caveat to it. That's which came after the article written by Jason Collins. It says in the aftermath of the article, here comes S.L. Price, one of the Sports Illustrated writers, says, "So here we are at last. Did it happen the way you expected?" In other words, you bigots out there, Is he, now listen very carefully. Were you picturing a press conference complete with a felix of friends, family, coach, teammates, maybe even a partner on some 50-yard line, some home plate at center ice in Madison Square Garden? Is the man the type you envision? Were you fearing he'd be too effeminate, too Dutch, too butch, too normal? Come on now. We all had a vague idea of what it would look like and feel like when America saw its first gay man come out in a major team sport. Was Jason Collins ever on your short list? And the answer, let me answer for All America. I think I speak for All America here. No, he wasn't. He wasn't on the short list, on the long list, and he's on no list right now. So he likes men's. Whoop-de-doo. We don't care.
That's like, I know you don't swear, but I consider that, excuse me, this is your show, but I don't give a rat's ass, okay? I don't. I mean, it was why do I have to celebrate that he likes that? I mean,
just because I may not agree with the lifestyle, I don't have anything to say about it. And you know what, that 2 words, how much time you got, John? 2 minutes? Okay, I'm going to finish this up in 2 minutes. But you know something I've heard since I was a child? And it shows you how far we have come from where we were when I was a child. I know you're saying, well, that's back in the days of Methuselah. Okay, then so be it. But we're here now. I have not heard the word bulldagger and not heard the word sissy in terms of a person that is effeminate since I was a child. I just don't hear those words. And I have people that have umbrage. There's one guy, Kevin Jackson, a black conservative, that has the Blackosphere, which is a blog, a black conservative blog, and he said, "I'm coming out. I'm black, and I'm not gay." That thing, I think that's two sides, two levels away from James Brown. I'm black and I'm proud. I'm black and I'm gay. I'm black and I'm not gay. So I don't know what the next one's gonna be. But I do know that even the intolerance of that time period, where you use names, nobody in the neighborhood was going around knocking these guys upside the head. We just paid attention to the fact that we're switching. And you say you're behind the backwards, so he's a sissy. I haven't heard that in the last half century. People just have gotten over that and let people live their lives. Whether they approve it or not, they're not bringing ropes anymore to the parties and riding in neighborhoods and trying to stop you from whom you fall in love with, which basically was the Klan put up by these politicians. The American people, by and large, didn't care about it. There weren't that many people on those sheets. You put a small number, and so just get over it, okay? And look, Sports Illustrated. If you're going to do something that's going to titillate our fancies, bring out the swimsuit issue and stop all this madness here. Because Jason Collins, you want to start a conversation. We don't want you to start a conversation. We want you to just practice your lifestyle and learn to hit more than 2 points in a game. Otherwise, we ain't bringing you back next year. It has nothing to do with your sexuality. It has to do with we got to get somebody to hit 3 points a game. That'd be better than what you're contributing to the team. Okay, we got to get out of here. That's my 3 cents. We have 2 cents on this one program on Fox. That's my 3 cents here on FlintTalkRadio.com. We want you to follow all the programs here on FlintTalkRadio.com. Until next time, we want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.